And I'm back in control of the show. How's everyone
No.
doing today? We are the XP Billionaires, and this is our fun program. So I am Ray Fegram. I've got Irene Rogue. How are you today?
Good, good. Rested from the seat of power, but good.
Yes, yes. I'm sure you'll be back on it someday.
Count on it.
I'm sure I can lose a bet one way or another.
Yeah.
And we've also got Sky Knight. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Quite happy to not be in the seat of power, thank you.
Oh, you know you love it when you're there.
But would I ever admit to it?
I mean, it's pretty obvious when you DM, to be honest.
Shh. Quiet you.
And the thought of dethroning you for that in some time in the future, oh, geez. I don't know how you're going to
Yeah,
do it.
I don't know if Sky is worse as a DM or as a player.
It's been a long time. We're going to find out sooner or later. All right. Well, we have got a new kind of show for you today. Always trying to give us some new topics, new segments that we're going to do. And for this one, with this new segment, what we're going to be doing is we're going to start talking about a specific, either an RPG franchise or a specific developer if they've only made so many games. In this particular episode, what we're going to focus on is a franchise that has one of the larger lores, in my opinion, when it comes to its story. We're looking at two multi-volume game series. We're talking about a manga, an anime franchise,
Not
light
multiple.
novelizations. Yes, it spans all over. And if you don't know what we're talking about just yet, what I'm referring to is the Dot Hack franchise. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk more about the games themselves than anything else, since we are a gaming podcast. But for any type of context, or for those who have not had the chance to, whether or not it's play the games or check out the expanded lore, I recommend it. I definitely do. Now, it is very likely we're going to go into spoiler territory with this episode. So
We're
if
going into spoiler territory in this episode.
Okay. Yes, we are. So if the Dot Hack games were on your list, or if you've recently picked up the Dot Hack GU Last Recode remaster and have yet to play it, or never played it before, while we'd love to have you listen to it, just be prepared for the spoilers that are coming, and hopefully we don't ruin too much for you. With that said, what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of go into a bit of a history of the games, and then we'll discuss some aspects of it. So I'm going to be a little bit long-winded here, so you guys are going to have to bear with me, and I am sorry for that.
I'll just give me a sec. I'll settle in. There we go.
That's actually probably a good idea. So the first franchise, the first gaming series that came out started with the games Dot Hack Infection, followed by Mutation, Outbreak, and then Quarantine. The release dates spanned between 2003 and 2004 when they were released in the West. So the storyline follows as you playing as Kite, a new player in the MMO known as The World. While learning how to play from a character named Orca, who is a very well-known player and actually a classmate of Kite's IRL, you encounter a monster that's chasing a ghostly figure. The monster sees you and starts attacking Orca and uses a skill that, after the game basically crashes, you find out that your friend Orca has been put into a coma in the real world. So Kite starts going into the game to see if he can investigate what's going on, eventually being granted a power that actually deviates from the system itself, while learning a lot about the game's development and how everything all ties in together. The admins hate him, the hackers love him, and the friends he makes may or may not be caught in the crossfire. So this was, the progenitor of the MMO gone wrong. So for those of you who are big Sword Art Online fans, if you don't know already, I'm sorry, but someone did it before them. So they are the copycats. deal with it.
I would also venture to say Dot Hack does it better than Sword Art Online.
Fair enough. So with from all four of the games, while each game you could clear in 20 hours, even less if you knew what you were doing. You got a really, really full experience. And these were some of the first games the PS2 had to offer. And so, while graphically they were good to the extent the PS2 was starting to show off, obviously there could have been improvements. But what I want to know from you guys, like, what did you guys really like or dislike about the original set of games? Sky, why don't we start with you?
Well, the gameplay is fun as hell, even if it gets a little tired by the time you get to the third and fourth game. I'm going to say specifically the boss fights with the phases and Kubia were awesome. Awesome epic fights, particularly the brutal fight with Skaith, the first phase at the end of Infection. It really does feel like you're fighting demigod-like beings when you do these fights. Like you are transcending the system by even attempting to fight these things. It's a pretty cool feeling. And, they're surrounded by good story content. Learning that Mia was a phase was just heartbreaking. I felt so bad for Elk. He did not take that well. But in terms of things I disliked, the dungeon design got a bit tired. We needed more variation. It would have helped it feel like less of a slog by giving us different things to explore. And the other thing is, the goblins can find a fiery place in hell to race in. They suck. Oh, that I am not good at the goblin racing, and I hate even trying. It's just awful. And somebody else start talking before I rant more about goblins.
No, fair enough. Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Yeah, and definitely the phases, especially the Kubia fights. More specifically, I think the last Kubia fight was probably among the most epic fights in the game. The phases were one thing, but like as you were crawling up its body, that was one of the trippiest moments
That was
that
pretty
game
cool.
had to offer.
That was
Yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah, no, definitely. All right, Irene, what have you got for me?
So it's been a very, very, very long time since I've played these games. So I'm reaching back into my memory quite a bit. But I would have to say one of my favorite things about them was the overall tone. Like this mixture of fantasy and sci-fi was just perfect with an almost like mysticism to the code that existed within the world. Like like there was a supernatural force that lived inside the data, which I've always found fascinating, to be honest, as an overall theme. And the games did lean into some, not necessarily full-on horror storytelling elements, but it did have that like those psychological undertones to it where everything just felt a little bit unsettled. Like nothing necessarily it was like there was a thin veneer that as soon as you start peeling back the curtain, behind it is nothing but incomprehensible madness. And it changes you to actually look at it. And that's what your characters are actually doing. They're like peeling back the layers of this seemingly innocuous space to find, like these terrible beings that live inside the code and that are capable of significant damage, not just in the game world, but in the real world as well.
Well, and there's hints of it even in the design too. Like when you think about how actually weird and creepy some of the dungeon designs are, like the belly, like
Yeah, like, oh, going in through those like giant flesh monster
it does,
dungeons.
yeah, it's surreal and and creepy in a way that sort of it almost hints at this underbelly, um, pun
Well,
intended.
even
To
just the like forbidden hidden holy ground. Like that
Yeah.
one area that's featured so prominently in all the Dot Hack games. That cathedral is imposing.
Oh yeah, Hul Grans is it's an incredible location, and it's and really once I'm skipping ahead here slightly, but when you start to see all the various holy grounds that show up in GU, and all that, you know, they speak to just a little bit more of the underbelly of the world.
Yeah, so it's like the world is sitting on top of just this writhing mass of chaos, and it doesn't. It's sort of like it's the whole theme is like the line between sanity and madness is so fucking thin. And it's so easy to just sort of find yourself falling into it if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And I really liked that about those games is that it's like here is this really narrow walk, and the game definitely is like, well, not even like you don't necessarily get to decide what you're going to do, and as the characters are very much pushed over the edge almost immediately. So now it's them trying to figure out what to do with this new perspective on everything around them, where something that's supposed to be a distraction is suddenly quite lethal if they're not careful.
Exactly.
I am going to have to say though, for as a disc-like, fucking Skeeth. That boss fight is the worst fucking fight. The difficulty curve between that fight and the rest of the game would make Dark Souls veterans cry. Like, I ran at that boss. Every time I had to run at him, I had to make sure I had time to make multiple attempts because he would inevitably beat me like I owed him money. And, like, part of the problem was, of course, I'm playing these when I'm very young, so I'm not necessarily making the correct strategic decisions. But at the same time, I had a strategy that worked literally everywhere else except this one fight, which was bring a Wave Master to heal for you, but that strategy that works everywhere else does not work because the Wave Master just gets one-shotted every single time.
Yeah, you see in that fight, you really the best way to go at it is to take two heavy blades, like to take Sandro and Black Rose and have Kite do the healing because a Wave Master can't even begin to survive.
Exactly, but that's the setup that has worked literally
Sure.
through the entire game up to that point.
Sure,
And then suddenly
it's
you have to rethink everything.
Escape is absolutely brutal. Even even if you do the strategy that I mentioned, um, it does. I both like and dislike that because it really adds this added um, um, horror to Skaith that sort of plays down is interesting later down the line. But on the other hand, it does sort of take away from the strength of the other phases who are much easier to beat.
Yeah, and I think that maybe Skaith could have been balanced a little better. His design was really cool, though. I love that
Yeah.
staff, and like I really like the overall design of the boss. The fight is cool as hell, but like the game has basically trained you that this is the winning strategy, and then it tells you, yeah, that's not going to work anymore. With no warning, no like time to really rethink your strategy. So like I spent a lot of time basically gearing up Elk and leveling up so that I could get past Skeeth. Like it was possible to do with Elk. It was just like playing Dark Souls on hard mode.
Yeah, there's
You had to be very careful.
yeah.
And if Elk died, then I was like, well, I guess that's kind of game. Try
Yeah.
again. And the walk to get to him was not short. Like
No.
between the final save point and actually engaging the boss, it was like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna keep going, you know?
Yeah. Rafe, I don't think you've chipped in yet.
No, I haven't. No, you guys have touched on a lot of points of mine. The only thing I'm going to touch on then is what Bandai and CyberConnect decided to do for this game. And what they did, and this is what they did with both games, is where they really pointed out that this is a simulated MMO. This is one of the things I actually was a selling point for me that I thought that really made it worthwhile. The fact that you weren't necessarily playing as Kite, you were playing as the 14-year-old middle schooler who was playing Kite. So throughout the game, you would have to log out, check your email, check your message boards. This was such a unique idea for an RPG concept, especially since MMOs were so new to gaming in general at the time.
Very.
And I loved it. I thought it was an incredible idea for them, and it made that series stand out. And I didn't even get to the game right away when the PS2 launched. I didn't get a PS2 for a couple of years until after it had launched. But when I got to these games, I thought this is genius.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that too. I'm actually kind of sad that they've never done more .hack games after GU, because like that's like we're gonna go. It's two whole generations without more of them. But and I think there's still like because online play is a thing that is so prevalent in today's gaming ecosystem doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean there's no room for a game like .hack.
You're absolutely right. And while you say that there hasn't been anything since GU, wait until we're done because there is something that I'll be talking about just after that.
Ooh.
Yeah, something some people don't know about, but I wanna bring it up for a lot of other people too. So we'll save that. That's the big surprise for the .hack fans. I'm sure most people already know what it is, but for you guys, I'll tell you about it after. So let's just quickly, before we start jumping into the next game, let's just quickly just mention what one of our favorite moments in the original series was. So Sky, what was yours?
Mine was the end of the second game. So basically, you warp into one of the towns, Carmina Gadelica, and you are absolutely horrified to see that the towns have been infected. Up until this point, the towns have been unaffected by all the weird buggy virus shit that's been going on. But you get to Carmina, you realize it's been infected, and then all you see is this shot from behind of Black Rose, and she just drops her sword. Like her fingers just fall open and the sword clings to the ground. And then the credits roll.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. And one of the novelizations, one of the light novel series, is actually a four-part series that is told through her perspective. They do a really good job describing that.
Yeah, it's an awesome cliffhanger. It's perfectly delivered, and it really emphasizes the fact that things are starting to get really bad. Like this isn't something everyone can ignore anymore. Like it's right there in your face. It's in the towns. You know, it's bad.
No,
And if I remember
definitely.
correctly, up until that point, like the official line from like the company that manufactures the world is everything's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, classic cover up. All right, Irene, what about you? What was one of your favorite parts?
So, like I said, I haven't played these in a long time, but I'm gonna have to pick your first visit to Net Slum. So that atmosphere, I was like that, like I said before, that atmosphere of like that horror and like the feeling that something's lurking right beneath the surface. It's like the cover gets thrown back and shows you like the chaos that lives underneath. Like the denizens of Net Slum make the player and the characters decidedly uncomfortable with their strange glitchy avatars and jumbled speech. They're literally leftover ghosts of deleted data. And it shows that it really like emphasizes that the reason the world feels kind of haunted is because it is.
It really is. And I mean, like those ghosts, so to speak, are really weird with their TV faces and their fractured speech, and it's it's a really cool thing to when you go to NetSum for the first time.
Yeah, and meanwhile you've got Helba who just like hangs out there like it's totally normal.
I love Helba.
I like her a lot too, but like Netslum is an area that was designed to be decidedly unsettling, and I think they nailed it.
Hmm.
No, absolutely. As for mine, my choices, my favorite moment was really when Kite used the bracelet for the very first time. There's a monster that just showed up at the cathedral out of nowhere that just came out, just totally blindsided everybody, even Balmung, who happened to be there at the time too. Kite unleashes the bracelet and he has no control over it. Like the actual scene, he's in the air while the bracelet is stationary and he's using it for the first time. It was a fantastic scene for this power that just is not supposed to exist in the game, and it was portrayed incredibly well, and I loved it.
I also really like the fact that whenever you encounter a monster that was worthwhile to data drain, like the level of the monster is always displayed next to the monster's like the monster's health bar or whatever, right? And the
Yeah.
level would always come out like garbled and shifting constantly, like nonsense numbers
Yes.
or nonsense characters.
Yeah, the design of that there was a bug there was portrayed really well.
Exactly.
But anyway, so that's what we have
Yeah.
for the original games. So what happened next? Like after the release of what I call IMOC, we waited 2 whole years to find out the world's future. And on October 24th, 2006, the West received a sequel series start in the Dot Hack GU games. So this was a 3-volume series that followed the PKK, or Player Killer Killer, named Haseo, and his hunt for a legendary player killer known as Tri-Edge. Apparently, Tri-Edge had PK'd a friend of Haseo's named Shino, and once again, her IRL body is lying comatose in a hospital. So Haseo's journey takes a turn when he's recruited by a special group of players whose player character bodies, including his own, hold a very dark secret. Dun,
And
dun.
and for those of you who actually tuned in to my very first live stream, you did get to see the beginning of that game.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So this was a definite change up because not only has the world evolved into Revision 2, but everything about the game got an upgrade in and of itself. And the character designs, more classes, more options. They really did a good job at showing that, hey, this is a proper sequel to an online game where
Right?
we took your feedback from the last one and started a new one. So this was a really good idea for in that regard. Now, in terms of that, so since we've all played through these ones and at least a little bit more recently, what are some likes and dislikes from these ones? Let's start with Irene this time.
2 words. Haseo Grunty.
His name is Death Grunty, but yes.
Whatever. The Grunty that is essentially Haseo, except Grunty. I loved how much, like, this Grunty is just this little piggy-looking cow mascot that's dressed up and has the same hairstyle as Haseo and exactly the same abrasive personality. I have no idea how this Grunty figured out how much of a dick he is to everybody, but he managed. And I love the interactions between Haseo and Death Grunty because they're so much alike. And of course, Haseo is like really annoyed by Death Grunty, but never really cottons on to the fact that he's annoyed because Death Grunty is him.
Yeah, and in specific, he is Haseo as he begins his journey.
Yeah, I don't think Death Grunty really evolves that much, to be honest.
No.
He stays the prick forever.
Haseo at the end of the GU games is a very different person from the one he was at the beginning. And that's handled very well, but so I feel like I have to make this distinction. Like, this is Haseo when the game starts.
And he is at his absolute worst.
Yes.
To the point where, like, there are people trying to help him, and he constantly mouths off, is sarcastic, tells them to, like, go screw themselves, like, all that fun shit. But Death Grunty never lets him forget where he came from. Because Death Grunty is always a jerk. For no reason. So I love, like, And I will say that I really like this dynamic, and I find it's very realistic because, full disclosure, I actually had this experience once with a video game character, Chie from Persona 4. And I think both Rafe and Sky remember me ranting about how much I hated her. Until one day it dawned on me, oh shit, she's me. And that's why I disliked her so much. There were too many similarities. It was like looking at a very uncomfortable mirror. So
you came around to liking her in the end.
I did.
Like that.
I did. I realized that the reason I disliked her was because I was seeing all of the things I wasn't necessarily as comfortable about myself in her, or like the things that people have criticized me for. Like, I don't know if anybody who listens to this podcast has caught on yet, but I'm loud.
No.
And chatty. And pretty, like, I'm not necessarily as blunt as, some of my friends, not necessarily the ones in this group, but still, I'm not particularly one to sugarcoat things. So it surprised me. She was very relatable, and it was too relatable. So I can understand why Haseo and Death Grunty butted heads so much. And I really like the way that whole relationship was handled. Also, Death Grunty's really, really, really fucking cute. Like, really cute.
all of those grunties are like the ones based on the guild grunties are.
Yeah.
I mean, the one based on Zelkova, Mellow Grunty. He is adorable. I just want to snuggle him.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things I really liked about the change between R1 and R2 is that you had in the R1 you bred grunties in order to be able to use them as basically transportation.
Yeah, they were mounts.
Because the maps were huge. Yeah. But they changed the maps in R2 so that they were much more streamlined, which I much preferred, by the way. But that also gave them room to be like, well, why don't we make these grunties like full on just mascots? And it worked. It worked really well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Sky, what did you like or dislike about the game?
Well, I thought the gameplay was way, 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 way better. Having the main character be able to wield multiple weapons was brilliant. It really helped keep things fresh. And I mean, the Rengeki moves, the special moves with the weapons, were just so satisfying. So satisfying to do. I still have issues with the dungeons or the areas. The environmental design in these games, frankly, is pretty uninspired. Even compared to the first set of games, in which they were kind of weird and quirky, even if there wasn't enough variation, these ones just felt uninspired and boring. There was more to do, and certain variations I liked better than others, but there were some silly things in how they were handled, including like where you were and were not allowed to use the bike. The bike was basically the replacement for the old grunties, the mount grunties.
I did really like being able to like run over enemies with it, though. That was fun.
Oh yeah. No, I mean what I'm specifically referring to is that when you have like more dungeony style ones, like the underground one, and the like stuff like the temple maps and stuff like that, you couldn't take the bike in there.
Yeah, I don't know why they decided to limit the use of the bike.
Yeah.
Because, like, it's already a motorbike and you're chasing goblins. Like, it's not necessarily going to suspend our disbelief. Oh, no, you can't go on the tiles.
Yeah, exactly. And, I found that really annoying. And there were certain types of dungeons I didn't like to do just for that reason, because it took them. And a lot of the areas were bigger than they really needed to be. Especially those more dungeon styled ones where you couldn't use the bike and it took forever to go through them on foot, and you're just like, oh.
I found that they weren't generally as long though as some of the ones in R1. Or am I just remembering that wrong?
I don't think so necessarily. It was often easier to speed through the ones in R1 because of the speed charms. I don't know, it seemed so much faster.
Mm,
One.
yeah.
And, the running in R2 simply wasn't that fast.
Yeah, I mean that's fair.
Yeah. So that was really my only problem. My only problem with them, because I mean, I can't stand Adelie, but I mean the rest of the cast is great, so
Oh yeah,
minor
Adelise.
issue.
And as we've talked about Adelie, I think before a little bit on the live stream, just or even when we were talking about voice acting, is that Adelie, I think Adelie's character is already kind of flimsy, and just the voice actress unfortunately just wasn't able to sell it.
Mm-hmm. Rafe?
Honestly, there hasn't been anything that I had to say that you guys haven't already covered. I mean, for me, just all of the major updates they did with the game was, making the combat more fluid. You're right about the Rengeki movements. I mean, it just made for a much more varied experience, and just happening to make the main character the multi-weapon class was actually just a really really good way to make the game more um, just more interesting and more diverse. So those were really my big things, and I don't really have a lot more to say on that in that particular bit because you two have already covered it all. So great.
Sorry for
Um,
stealing your thunder.
Oh, God, no, that's quite all right. But it does give us a chance to talk about our favorite moments. So, Irene, what are some of your favorite moments from the game, from the series?
So it's gonna be shocking to both of you, but pretty much any moment when Entrance is on screen.
Duh.
Duh. I love Entrance. He's such a drama queen. Like flowers, petals follow him everywhere. He's really just like I really like the way that this character has transitioned from Elk into Entrance between the two games. And it's really interesting to see like how he's changed, but also how he's profoundly stayed the same. Because in like the first series, Elk's very timid and he clings very much to Mia in order to like, make his way through the world. And well, eventually he can't do that anymore and it really fucks him up. But when you see him as Entrance, he's sort of figured out a way to move through the world on his own terms, in that he projects this incredible veneer of confidence and becomes
Well,
this sort of almost mini celebrity.
but he's also very cold, and I think that's a side effect of what happened with Mia,
Mm-hmm.
because really he was rather sweet initially.
Yeah, Elk was quite sweet initially. His reactive attachment disorder flares up again when he meets Haseo.
Yeah.
Well, there's that too, but you also have to think about how it escalated even more. Because if you think about it this way, Endrance Elk lost Mia once, and then Endrance lost Mia after the tournament with Haseo.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had what he assumed was Mia with that Ida influence at the time. So that's that's why really like at that point he's already lost that most important person to him twice. That's why in the second game I think is why he basically shut himself out and encased himself in ice for like the rest of the gameplay.
Though I very much liked the way that, especially in the through the emails, like you're able as Haseo, like the character, to reach out to Entrance and sort of like establish a much more like a connection, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
In fact, full disclosure, he is the only romanceable man in the entire game. And I was able to romance him, and the scene is amazing. The scene is amazing. And he's very adorable. Like adorkable is probably the best way to describe him.
Adorable, yeah.
He's portrays like he's got this avatar that's like suave and cool and beautiful, almost supernaturally beautiful, and
Well,
yet on the inside is this like massive dork.
Remember too that his avatar is Maha, which was also Mia.
Hmm.
He really understood that after he picked up his lost weapon into the second game. That was something I noticed after you did that fight to get his lost weapon. He understood.
I just really liked the whole arc with Entrance. It was a very interesting departure from the original character, but had enough callbacks in there where you could still see Elk, that little vulnerable kid, poking out from underneath, but who had figured out a way to sort of like get back on his feet, even if it was like fake it till you make it a little bit, you know?
Yeah, it very much was.
Yep. And I liked the fact that he was able, like, Haseo and him were able to at least like develop some sort of friendship. And he's like, "Here's an actual human person for you to interact with, Elk.
Yeah.
Please like this person. It's not a virus this time, I promise."
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, Sky, what's one of your favorite moments?
There are a lot of good ones, so it is a little hard to say, but I think one that really stands out for me is when Triedge, here are the air quotes, he kicks the stuffing out of Haseo in Hulgrand's cathedral and then drains all of his levels, like at the beginning of the first game. And it is, holy crap, you've gone from seeing Haseo as this complete badass who owns a bunch of PKs in this, in the epic opening sequence. And then he just loses so badly in that fight in the cathedral. It really helps drive up the tension for when you actually have to fight Tri-Edge late at the end of the first game. Like,
And Triad, like, just his character design as Kite, like,
yes.
zombie Kite, essentially, with,
It
like, shark teeth. Like,
Yeah.
it's, for the people who played the previous series of games, it's super unsettling.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, as for mine, now it was a toss up between two. No, Sky, you touched on one of them was that epic opening where Haseo just trashes like 20 PKers in like one go. It's a
It's
beautiful
amazing.
scene. As a matter of fact, that scene was in one of the very first trailers for the game. And I saw that trailer more than a year before the game was released. So I had to sit on that scene for that long just waiting for this game to come out.
That must have been
I was so
physically painful.
it was, and it was also really painful for on release day for the EB Games employee that was waiting for their shipment to show up while I wanted my game. That that was
Oh,
bad. I was a lot younger at the time, but yeah, I was pretty annoying that day, and even I knew it. But well, I think the one that stands out for me the most really is the scene entitled "Burn This Into Your Eyes." And if if you're worried about spoilers or major spoilers, this is one of them. So give us a couple 4 or 5 minutes to get through that because you don't want to hear this part. But this is the scene where you finally get to learn the truth. And Ovan tells you the truth. He finally opens up the thing in his arm, and it turns out to be like an Ida infection. He has been responsible for not only Ida, but he was also the real Tri-Edge. He was who PK Cheeto. And this actually can get spoiled very early if you are following the media lore, because that is explained in the last episode of Dot Hack Roots, the anime series. Oban actually confesses this to another character, Philo, in the last episode. But at this point, not only have we seen that Ovan revealing himself as Tri-Edge, but he also, right in front of Haseo's eyes, PKs both Pi and Adelie in the same way that should have put them both into comas. But basically, they think that the Avatar DNA kept them from going comatose. It was a horrifying scene for Haseo, and looking at the shock in his eyes was probably one of the most horrific and best storytelling plot twist moments in the game.
And honestly, Tri-Edge Ovan is terrifying.
Yes,
Like,
certainly.
How come these games aren't horror games? I'm just gonna throw that out there. Because there's a lot of horror elements being utilized.
well, you gotta it's one of those games that uses the trappings of horror without leaning into stuff like jump scares or um unsettling suspense. They don't use those things that actually make you terrified for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
They use the trappings. It's similar to a game like Persona 3, for instance.
Yeah, it's got a similar sort of like everything feels a little off tone.
Yeah. It's got a lot of the trappings of horror, and I mean, dear God, the chains in Tartarus. But
The blood in Tartarus as well.
yeah, it only goes part way. It doesn't sort of make you actively terrified most of the time.
This is true, but it's like a lot of the elements that you see there are quite like they're they can be very unsettling. So it's interesting that they lean so hard on them, but I think it was very effective. I don't think I've really seen another RPG series other than maybe Persona do that so well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly something. The one I would put out there is Shadow Hearts. Do not look too closely at the things you're fighting. Um,
Well, that'll be a topic for unfortunate and terrifying implications of video games part 2.
And
Because there are so many.
all right. Now, we've run very long, so I hope you guys have been engaged throughout the whole thing, view listeners. But I just got one last final aside before we sign off here. Irene, you were mentioning before, like you wish that there were more games in the franchise. Well, believe it or
Mhm.
not, there was. Um, yes, there was one more game. It was released back in 2010 for the PSP called Dot Hack Link. Now, the problem is it never made it westward. But there's a but. Just recently, near the end of 2018, a fan translating group actually translated the game and have released a patch for those who can emulate the Japanese game. It's I played through a little bit of it so far. I actually played through most of it without a translation, so I'm now getting the chance to go back to it with the translation, which is great. But essentially, what the game is, it's a very, very different style of game, but it celebrates the history of the world, and that's something that's really fun in that regard. The game follows a middle schooler named Tokyo, who ends up being physically transported into the world Revision X. When he's there, he learns that there's a hacker group known as Schicksal that apparently may or may not have been hired by CC Corp as to target something called the Akashic Record. But in order to stop them, basically Tokyo must have relived the history of the world, basically traveling back in time and interacting with the events of all of the series. It's a really interesting idea for what it is, and it is part of the canon, which is interesting. So it's if you get the opportunity to obtain it, I highly recommend it. It's just a really neat idea. Now, it is a little repetitive being a PSP game. They didn't put a lot of work into the combat or anything like that, but the story seems worth it. And getting to see these new interactions with characters and recruiting several of the heroes from the past games is actually a lot of fun too. Um, but that's all I have for that. I don't
I'd be interested to see if they don't have something in the hopper though. Just like they re-released all of like a remaster of Dot Hack GU last year.
That was an anniversary celebration thing.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
I
They
know.
normally don't necessarily do that unless there might be plans to, I don't know. I would actually also really like a re-release of the original 4 games because Lord knows fucking nobody could get their hands on Quarantine.
It's
that's
true.
true. Yeah. No,
I remember I picked that one
Oh.
up first and I didn't realize how rare it was until I collected all the others.
You were exceedingly lucky.
Mm-hmm.
They're extremely hard to find.
Yeah, I think I picked Quarantine up like brand new. And then I realized I didn't have the previous entries in the series.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've taken up enough of everyone's time. So let's do some quick sign-offs here. We're always on Twitter. I'm at Billionaires XP, and you'll see me lurking on some of the Twitch streams done by my other two hosts at Rafe Thegrum. So, Sky, whereabouts are you?
I'm at SkyKnightXP on Twitter and on Twitch.
Okay, Irene, whereabouts are you going to be?
I'm at iRogue_XP on Twitter and Twitch. And I'm also streaming usually regularly on Thursdays. And for this Women's History Month, it's all lady protagonists as part of my shtick.
I should mention that I usually stream on Tuesdays.
Yes.
And of course, check out our website for all of our podcasts, as well as other musings that may or may not appear somewhere in the future, xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. And if you guys can help towards our microphone donation goal, we would love that. That would be at coffee.com/xpbillionaires. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'll see you next week. Keep gaming.